You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, there was one tiny piece of silver lining with the Supreme Court's immunity ruling, and that was when the Supreme Court remanded the issue in the D.C. case back to the trial court to determine which issues were covered by this bogus idea of presidential immunity. That would mean we would see something of a mini trial while those issues got litigated. And that would be important because it would be the only time now that Donald Trump's efforts to undermine the 2020 election would actually be aired out before this November. But now, according to breaking reporting that just broke today, even that is at risk. So can you explain what's happening here?
Yeah, Brian, Donald Trump's lawyers are trying to snuff out that little bit of a silver lining, but here's the good news. They will fail. And here's why. Some really good new reporting by Hugo Lowell from The Guardian saying that Donald Trump's lawyers are going to try to block Judge Tanya Chutkan, the presiding judge in the D.C. case, from holding any hearings before the November election. And then there's kind of a second layer of attack. Even if the hearings go forward, the reporting is that Trump's lawyers are going to try to convince Judge Chutkan that there should be no witness testimony, no evidentiary hearing. In other words, they maintain, according to the reporting, that Judge Chutkan can just look at the acts that are set out in the indictment, listen to the arguments of the lawyers, the prosecutors and the defense attorneys, and make a decision as to whether they are official or unofficial acts. That really is not the way to go about having a full, complete, informative hearing based on the evidence, but that is what Donald Trump's lawyers are trying to do. Why are they trying to do it? Because the last thing they want is for the public, even though secondhand because there are no cameras in the courtroom, but the public to hear from literally dozens of Republican witnesses who testified before the D.C. grand jury about the crimes of Donald Trump. People like Mike Pence and so many others. That's why this is a desperate attempt to stop the evidentiary hearing from taking place. And here's what I love, Brian. When I read through the reporting, their, main argument is going to be executive privilege. Donald Trump is going to invoke executive privilege and tell Mike Pence he may not testify. There's a little problem with that. Donald Trump isn't president. He isn't the chief executive. He does not get to invoke executive privilege. The sitting president is the one who holds the executive privilege. If you remember a year or more ago, Donald Trump tried to claim executive privilege, I believe, over some of the documents that he stole from the government and ferreted away to his Florida home, Mar-a-Lago. And Joe Biden said, excuse me, I'm the president, and I will not be invoking executive privilege to protect you or cover up your crimes, Donald. That's not exactly how Joe Biden said it, but that was in substance what Joe Biden said. So the executive privilege dog won't hunt.
So Trump's lawyers, like you said, are going to argue that the judge can just decide whether the conduct is immune based on legal arguments and that they won't need any witnesses or evidentiary hearings to make this decision. But who decides that? Like, we know what Trump's lawyers want to do, but who makes the final say here? Is it Judge Chutkan who decides whether or not Trump's lawyers get what they're asking for?
Absolutely. Judge Tanya Chutkan, presiding over the D.C. prosecution of Donald Trump's January 6th crimes, is the one who will make that call. And I can tell you, Brian, we've talked about this before. Judge Tanya Chutkan don't play. I know that firsthand because I used to try murder cases against Tanya Chutkan. When she was a public defender and I was a federal homicide prosecutor, we tried cases against one another in the courts of D.C. And let me tell you, she is a strong, honorable, fierce advocate. And as a judge, I have followed her career closely, been in her courtroom many times. And she is somebody who is actually independent, impartial, completely fair to both sides, prosecution and defense. So I would pretty much characterize her right now as the anti-Judge Aileen Cannon.
Yeah, which is a good place to be. Glenn, you had mentioned that Trump's attorneys will try to make it so that no witnesses can testify. Is it possible that Donald Trump himself can be forced to testify here during these evidentiary hearings, these witness hearings, in the event that Judge Chutkan decides that they are going to move forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. The answer is no. No defendant in a criminal case can ever be forced or compelled to testify. Why? Because he retains his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination. Now, If he chooses to testify and waive his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, he can testify all day long. We know he can't do it credibly or truthfully, but he could certainly do it. But I can promise you his lawyers will not permit it. But ultimately, Judge Chutkan will be the one who decides, whether witnesses should testify. If so, which witnesses should be permitted to be called. Jack Smith will probably want to call a whole host of witnesses to fully develop the record and the evidence on why all of the many acts in the indictment concerning Donald Trump's crimes on and around January 6th are absolutely not official presidential acts. If anything, they are the acts of Donald Trump as he is a candidate. He's trying to desperately hold on to the power of the presidency, even though he was voted out of office by the American people. So these hearings are going to be important, really, for multiple reasons. We're going to get to see some of the deeply damaging, sharply incriminating evidence that was provided to the grand jury by Republican witnesses about the crimes of Donald Trump. And we're going to learn more about just what charges will survive this new Supreme Court, a president is a king ruling. And in my opinion, quite a few of the charges should survive.
Glenn, given the fact that we're not going to see this thing actually go to trial, obviously that underscores the importance of this mini trial here, because like I said at the top, this is it. This is our only shot to remind the American people what happened in this case and to get it litigated at least to some small degree before the November election. So in what way can prosecutors prosecute this mini trial in a way that would be most damaging to Trump and to kind of to get the biggest bang for their buck here, given that we don't have any other opportunity?
It is to expose to the full light of day the most incriminating evidence that the prosecutors assembled over their multi-year investigation about the crimes of Donald Trump, the democracy-busting crimes of Donald Trump on and around January 6th. It will be witnesses. It will be documents, for example. There are likely to be text messages, emails, phone records, perhaps cell site information, which is almost like GPS, putting people at certain places at certain times, or at least in as much as they are holding on to their phones at those times. It will be just as if Jack Smith is presenting a case to the jury, and in a sense he is. He's going to present the case to Judge Chutkan, but a byproduct of that is the case is being presented to we the people, the American voters. And as I've been saying in recent days since the Supreme Court handed down the absolute presidential immunity ruling, we have now been selected as the jury, we the people, the voters, and we will be the ones, we'll be the last jury standing between Donald Trump and dictatorship, and we get to go to the polls on November 5th and vote guilty based on the evidence of what Donald Trump did to try to bring an end to the American democracy.
So in a way, was this kind of a backfire for the Supreme Court and Donald Trump? Because now, instead of waiting for the whole process to play itself out, we are immediately going to this mini trial to litigate basically the entirety of this case before Judge Chutkan, and they are going to have the opportunity to make their case to the American people before the November election.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that I'd call it a backfire. I would say the Supreme Court tried to close the door on Donald Trump being held criminally responsible by a jury, in the setting of a trial proper. But when they closed that door, a window got cracked open, whether they were intending that or not. And now through that open window will pour all sorts of incriminating evidence that will be really important for the American voters to know about in advance of the presidential election.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess it's really not fair to call the Supreme Court granting Donald Trump vast presidential immunity for criminal behavior a backfire for him. I think if anybody really lucked out in all of this, it's Donald Trump. Glenn, real quick, when can we expect to see this mini trial actually occur?
So, you have to wait for what's called the mandate to be returned from the Supreme Court back to Judge Chutkan. That's got about another 3 weeks now before we will see that happen. And then I have a feeling you're going to see Judge Chutkan do a couple of things. One, she's going to immediately call the parties in to set a series of hearing dates, probably in the very near future, like within a matter of weeks. You're also going to see her starting to rule on motions that have been lying dormant ever since the case was frozen in Judge Chutkan's court. So as I say, I'm going to say it again because It is the absolute truth based on my personal experience. Judge Chutkan don't play, and she is not going to play with this case.
Yeah, something that Judge Cannon could probably learn a thing or two about. Again, we will stay on top of this little process as it plays itself out, as well as the broader implications of Trump's prosecutions as well. So for those watching right now, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. Glenn is fast on his way to 1 million subscribers. If you are not yet subscribed to his channel, please go ahead and subscribe. And my channel is on its way to 3 million. So if you're not yet subscribed to this channel, do me a favor and subscribe to this one as well. I'm Brian Teller Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.